First and foremost, let me just begin by saying how great it is to be back here again, having been here just a little while ago and being able to experience the warmth and the vibrancy of the Park East Synagogue. And let me say to you, Rabbi Schneier, how, first of all, thank you very much for that beautiful and warm introduction. And Shmoy Hoylech Lefanov, obviously your reputation precedes you throughout the world. And I had always heard so much about you, but having come last time already over a Shabbos and being able to watch you firsthand in action, Kenei Nahara, with the vibrancy still there, so strong, so powerful, so dynamic, I could only but bless you that you should carry on for many more years in good health, lots of happiness, gesund, nachas from the family, and just continued strength and vibrancy together with your wonderful wife and all of your family.
My wife is responsible for that.
Okay, there you go. And at the same time, I need to take this opportunity to also thank Cantor Benny because he's a great ambassador for this community, for this shul. He's been an amazing liaison, an amazing host. So thank you very much as well for all of that. So let's jump straight into the topic of this evening, the pursuit of happiness, beginning with a woman who was dealing with a whole range of issues that were really plaguing her. She had a perpetual migraine headache. She went to her doctor, he wrote her a prescription, sent her on her way. Nothing seemed to help. And then eventually she decided to go and talk to her rabbi. And she sat with her rabbi for the better part of 3 hours. You see, doctors have patience, but rabbis have patience. And she spent the 3 hours talking to her rabbi, expressing everything. And then after the 3 hours, she looked to her rabbi and said, "Rabbi, you're not just a scholar, you're a miracle worker." He looks to her and says, "Well, why do you say that?" To which she replied, "Because after having offloaded now to you over these last 3 hours, my migraine has finally gone away." To which the rabbi then looked to her and replied, "My dear, it hasn't disappeared. It has merely transferred from you over to me." You know, it's not just Jews, but the world in general realizes that the human being consists essentially of two elements. We have a body and we have a soul. Society uses a word different to soul, but suggesting there are different elements. There's the physical and there is the mental, if you will, or the spiritual. In philosophy, this dichotomy of the human being consisting of two separate components presents a very complex problem. In philosophy, this is called the mind-body problem. What is the mind-body problem? The body is something physical. The mind is not something physical at all. It may function through a physical organ known as the brain, but the mind in and of itself is not physical. It's something spiritual or mental, if you will. Both the physical and the mental are mutually exclusive. As such, the physical invariably leaves an impact on that which is physical, whilst the mental leaves an impact on that which is mental. It makes no sense whatsoever to suggest that the body should affect the mind or the mind should affect the body. For two things to affect one another, there has to be a common denominator between them, some intermediary that connects them. But mind and body, in essence, have no connection whatsoever. And yet the reality is, as we know, that the two certainly do affect one another. When you drink alcohol, something physical, it affects the mind. When you take medication, something physical, it can affect the mind. How does it make sense that these physical entities can affect your mind, your mental state? Conversely, in medicine, there is a phenomenon known as psychosomatic symptoms. That's where people can imagine something in their minds, hence purely mental, and yet that can impact on them physically. You can actually talk yourself, God forbid, into illness. Or to the flip side, you can sometimes see the power of the mind helping to cause illness to go into remission. Sometimes the strength of the mind can affect an outright curative result. Neither of these two ideas make any sense whatsoever. How can the body affect the mind? How can the mind affect the body if there's no connection between the two? How can physical elements like drugs or alcohol impact my mind, thus enabling me to perceive things somewhat differently and vice versa? It is honestly a perennial philosophical paradox for questions which really have no answer. Philosophy will tell you all we know is those are the facts. That's the reality. And so the philosophers can only ever really speak about what we call a mind-body interaction. We simply know that they interact with one another, even if we don't know or understand how. And here's the point. There are essentially three elements to our reality which everybody can relate to: the way we think, the words we speak, and the actions that we commit. And whilst we can all appreciate how what we say, and certainly what we do, can make a very real difference to our reality, what perhaps we don't as readily appreciate is that how this is very true in the context of the impact of our thinking process as well. The mind can affect the body. A fundamental Jewish principle is that man is attached to the object of his or her speech and thought. If you speak negative or you think negative, you become mired in negativity. You become attached, if you will, to the negative. And negativity then kind of sticks to you, it cleaves to you. To the flip side, of course, if you think positive, you attach yourself to positivity, which in turn encompasses you engendering goodness and compassion and positivity in your life. Now, I obviously have to stipulate before I go any further a certain qualification over here. And that is that obviously we're not talking about certain things that happen in a person's life that can overwhelm them considerably, or what sometimes is chemical imbalance, etc. Those are genuine medical issues of sorts that need to be dealt with professionally and accordingly. What I'm talking about here tonight is the pursuit of happiness in our own ongoing regular day-to-day living. One of the earliest examples that we find of how your mind impacts your reality is of our greatest leader, Moses himself. The Torah relates to us, as we all know, because we're reading the whole Exodus story right now. How Moses goes out there on his first experience stepping into Egypt, and he encounters an Egyptian beating up on a Jew. What does he do? He steps up, he strikes the Egyptian, neutralizes the threat, if you will, using modern jargon. And then the next day, he encounters two Jews beating up on each other. And he challenges them about their behavior. And then one of them turns to him and says to him, "What are you going to do? Are you going to kill me or us like you did the Egyptian the day before?" And then the Torah immediately tells us that Moshe it doesn't say he became afraid. It says he became very afraid, frightened. And then immediately juxtaposed to that in the next verse, it tells us that Moses had to go on the run. He had to run out of Egypt, run off to Midian. And commentaries observe and make the following observation. They make this following point. They tell us that in that moment, when Moses was confronted by the fact that he had left a smoking gun that somebody saw, "Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian?" He had one of two choice reactions. Option one would be to maintain composure, to maintain that same level-headedness or positivity as he did the day before when he did what he felt he needed to do in regard to that Egyptian. Option two, as indeed is what happened, is he became overwhelmed with fear, with negativity, as a direct result of which he then had to go on the run. Says the Medrash, the Torah makes a very deliberate point of juxtaposing Moses' fear with the fact that he had to go on the run to emphasize the fact that it's precisely the fear, that adverse mindset, that negative thinking, that is what engendered the negative consequence. I don't know how it would have worked out otherwise. But what the Medrash is in fact telling us is that if Moses would not have panicked, if he would have maintained that same conviction as he did when initially doing what he felt he needed to do with the Egyptian, that it'll be good, notwithstanding the witnesses and whatever the pending threats, then it would have panned out altogether different. And the point is that life is a grindstone. Whether it grinds us down or polishes us up depends very much on the level and the extent of our own thinking process. Or as a grandfather once explained to his grandson, sometime soon after the Holocaust, I feel as though there are two wolves fighting inside my heart. One wolf is full of anger, full of despair, full of hopelessness. The other is full of compassion, strength, and hope. And the grandson asked, Zayda, which wolf will win that fight in your heart? To which he replied, the one that I feed. We have to think positively. We have to speak positively. Few things in life are more powerful than a positive perspective because it affects everything we do. Good positive vibes affect our reality much more so than we actually realize. You may not believe that to be true. And even if you do, it's easy to forget, especially indeed, of course, when life does throw at us its curveballs. It's hard to stay positive when the world appears to be coming apart at the seam. But that's precisely when optimism is most vital, because our perceptions to a large extent determine our reality. One of my all-time favorite stories is about the two Hasidic half-brothers, Rabbi Melech of Lezhensk and Rabbi Zusha of Anapol, who once observed a Ukrainian policeman beating up on a Jew. And they decided to go and take action. So they went and they beat up the policeman instead to save the Jew, as a result of which they were then taken and thrown into jail. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Zusha looks over at his brother, half-brother, Rabbi Melech, and he sees him looking so despondent. He says, what's wrong? Why are you so sad? He says, because I can see through the window that the sun is setting. And there's a latrine, like a toilet here in the middle of the prison. And I haven't yet davened mincha. And now I won't be able to daven mincha. So Rabbi Zusha looked to him and said to him, you can't daven mincha because Jewish law says when you are in proximity of something inappropriate or something disgusting, then you cannot pray. You can't do anything holy at that moment in time. Whenever before in your life did you have an opportunity to actually adhere to that law? Ordinarily, you just walk away from it. Now you have a real opportunity to adhere to that obscure law. Changed the perspective, as a result of which Rabbi Melech suddenly got full of joy. Indeed, wow, this moment in time, I can actually adhere to that Jewish law of not being able to daven mincha in the presence of this latrine over here in this prison. Whereupon he took Rabbi Zusha and he started to dance around the latrine. So filled with ecstasy was he. And all the other drunken boors in the prison saw this, so they joined in the circle as well, and they're dancing around the latrine. The prison guard hears the commotion. He comes running over. What's going on? Rabbi Melech and Rabbi Zusha are dancing around, pointing to the latrine. So all the others start pointing to the latrine as well. And the guard says, the latrine, huh? I'll teach you. And he goes and he removes the latrine from the prison. And Rabbi Zusha looks at Rabbi Melech and says, now go daven mincha. Same circumstance, different perspective. And I'll use another analogy. Imagine renting a nice wooden cabin in a beautiful forest for your honeymoon. The place is charming. At dawn, however, a woodpecker starts its loud rat-a-tat-tat pounding away on the roof. The noise is so loud you can't go back to sleep. It goes on for hours. It happens at dawn again the second morning and again on the third morning and so forth. What would you do? Some might say, shoot the bird. Most people will conclude that the woodpecker ruined their honeymoon. The cabin experience was a failure. You might wonder why I picked such an obscure example, but it is because this woodpecker experience actually happened to a couple named Gracie and Walter Lantz on their honeymoon. However, instead of deciding that the cabin was a failure, they changed their thinking and asked, what if it's a success? What if the woodpecker provides an opportunity, a possibility? The only thing left to do is find that opportunity. And by the time they had returned home from their honeymoon, they found it became a huge commercial success. Indeed, we all know it. They created the cartoon character Woody Woodpecker. Walter was the illustrator. Gracie became the voice. Many years later, when interviewed on their 50th wedding anniversary, Gracie said it was the best thing that ever happened to us. Think about this for a minute. If Gracie and Walter had become upset and decided that the cabin experience was a failure, it would have been a failure. But because they said it was a success, it became a success. You see, we react to events as we perceive them, not as they are in themselves. if we learn to see things differently, if we learn to see things positively, we can alter our emotional reactions and increase the scope of our freedom and our happiness. So it's not always about changing jobs or changing houses or changing whatever else besides that. It's not necessarily the path to happiness. It's about changing our mindset. There's a lovely psalm that we recite every Shabbat and all the Chagim, the Jewish festivals, a song dedicated to the city of Jerusalem, the holy city of Jerusalem. It was composed by King David and sung by our ancestors as they went often up to the pilgrimage in the Holy Temple. The opening words read, Somachti b'omrim li bet Hashem nelech. I rejoice when they say to me, we're going to the house of God. And the obvious question is, what is the house of God? That obviously refers to the temple. Why is King David saying, I rejoice when they say to me, we're going up to the house of God? The temple did not exist in his time. King David was a man of war. God determined the temple can't be built by him. It was his son and successor, King Solomon, who was so peaceful, through whom the temple was built. So what does David mean when he says, I rejoice when they say, we're going up to the house of God? And one 13th century commentator explains, this actually refers to mean-spirited people who knew how much David wanted to build that temple, but obviously God had denied him that opportunity. So why is he happy? You'd expect him to be hurt and upset. These were people who were taunting him. These were people who were aware how much he wanted to build that temple. And they were going around saying, come, let's go to the house of God. They deliberately were trying to stick in the knife, rub salt into the wound. Why is he happy? And the answer is, because as far as David is concerned, I'm happy. Because regardless of their malicious intent, at least this means that the temple is on their minds, which reflects, if nothing else, a subconscious yearning for it to be built. And that in itself, David concluded, will ensure that it gets built. Now, you see, the instinctive response would have been a negative one, the exposing a wound in his heart. But he saw the silver lining. He looked beneath the superficial exterior and saw the implicit blessing within. Same reality, completely different perspective. We tend to think that emotions are simply what we feel. We don't choose our likes and our dislikes, our resentments and our joys. They catch hold of us, and they hold on to us helpless in their grip. So we conclude that we can't help feeling what we feel, that we are at the mercy of external events. But King David in the Psalms suggests something profoundly different. What we feel is largely determined by what we think, how we interpret external events, and how we choose to react to them. That is something that is completely under our control. It's revolutionary. It might fly in the face of many psychotherapists, but it is fundamental to Jewish thought and belief. To be sure, it doesn't mean that we change our thinking process so much that we distort reality if, God forbid, something happens. We don't deny events, but rather we choose the most positive path within the spectrum of responsible reactions. In fact, in the Torah portion read just the other day, what are we today? Sunday. Sorry, I left at 5 o'clock this morning with a canceled flight. So in the Torah portion that we read yesterday, we talk about the fact that the Jewish people came to a place called Marah, still before they came to Sinai. Marah, as we know, sounds like Marah, bitterness. Why was it so called? Because there the waters tasted bitter. The question is this: did the waters really taste bitter? Or was it the disposition of the people, having come out of Egypt, listless, directionless, no end in sight, fear of the unknown, that has impacted on their psyche to such an extreme extent that as a result, the waters tasted bitter? And so immediately afterwards, actually, some people call that the fox syndrome. You know what the fox syndrome is? A fox sees succulent grapes, which he desperately craves, but each time he jumps for it, he misses. And after a while, he gives up in exhausted defeat. And as he walks away, he says, they're probably no good anyway. They're probably not ripe. They're probably inedible. They're probably sour. They'll probably make me sick. How many of us go through that experience? Many people, when they can't get the grapes suddenly become sour in their minds. And that in turn sometimes becomes their reality. So immediately thereafter, the Torah tells us that God gave them mitzvot, still even prior to the giving of the Torah at Sinai, in order to give them a sense of purpose, a goal, a new meaning in their lives. We experience negativity in our lives. That's just fact. After that, it becomes a question of the extent that it impacts our reality to the point where everything becomes maybe sometimes so disproportionately bleak, and our whole outlook becomes utterly absorbed and distorted by the experience. So we can choose to succumb to all the negative feelings that come in the wake of adverse experience, or we can appreciate that our attitudes and moods are our choice. Some people go through life happy that the glass is half full. Others spend a lifetime lamenting that it's half empty. The hard fact is simply this: there is a glass with a certain volume of liquid in it. From there, it's very much up to you. There was a woman who walked up to a very wrinkled old man on a rocking chair, sitting there frailly on his porch. And she sees him with a big smile on his face, looking so happy. And she said to him, "I couldn't help noticing how happy you look. What is your secret for a long, happy life?" And he raised his hand weakly and gestured, and he says, "I smoke a pack of cigarettes every single day. I also drink a case of whiskey a week. I eat fatty foods, and I never exercise." And she says, "Wow, that's amazing. Mind if I ask, how old are you?" He says, "I'm 26. There are people who wake up, open their eyes, and say, "Good morning, God." They're going to have a great day. There are others who wake up and say, "Oh, good God, morning." Them, not so much. The difference is either where you despondently see every rose bush has thorns, or joyously perceive how even thorn bushes have roses. Positive thinking restores power to the individual. It says you are in control of your action. No circumstance outside of us, no drive within us can deprive us of our sovereign power to determine how we're going to perceive the situation. And that in turn can influence the outcome. And I think more than anything, this has been embedded in the Jewish psyche and approach to life, which has enabled us as a Jewish people through the ages to always see the light beyond the darkness. It is precisely this mindset which enabled us to prevail against the odds all through the course of history. It enabled us at the initial point in our time to be able to get out of Egypt and move beyond all the trial and tribulation and finally settle in the land of Israel. And 3,000 years later, it is what enabled Jews once more, after the ineffable events of the Holocaust, to make their way once more to the promised land and indeed rebuild it once more. And as Rabbi Schneier pointed out, tonight being Tu B'Shvat makes us reflect on the new year for trees. Where more can we appreciate that blessing than in the land of Israel, where a desert was literally transformed to be flourishing in the way that it is? And for that, we celebrate tonight more than ever. Do you know there is a concept in psychology that is referred to as the negative bias, which suggests that all things being equal, we have a tendency, a propensity towards being a little bit negative. But there's also a school of thought that suggests if you spend a mere 12 seconds trying to think about positivity, something positive, and you focus on that, it'll recalibrate your emotions and your thinking process. And it occurs to me that we Jews, we actually do that every single day quite cleverly. First thing in the morning, we open our eyes and we say, "Moda ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam shechazarta bi nishmati b'chemla rabba emunatecha," thanking God for the gift of a new day. 12 words, 12 seconds, and you're good to go. I see it around me all the time, from relationship issues to medical concerns, business quandaries, and whatever other personal challenges that one might be grappling with out there. There are those who might throw up their hands in despair and cry at their predicament. They lament their fate and they simply give up before they even consider options. And then there are others who look at the bigger picture and recognize that for as long as there is blood running through my veins, for as long as there's still something that I can do, I will summon the strength and resolve to fight for another day. If it's no good crying over spilled milk, as they like to say, how much more futile is it to cry before the jug even topples? Even as you perceive all the forces in the world bent on spilling it, you want to get in there and you want to do what you can to prevent it because, and this is key, one deed is worth more than 1,000 sighs. The starting point is thinking, knowing, believing that you can make a difference. Freud said, thought is action in rehearsal. Judaism says it is the very real beginning of the solution. The very real way in which we can alter destiny is the very real way by which we can change our slice of the world and everything else beyond. What determines the direction of the sea? Is it the direction of the wind or the set of the sails? Obviously, the sails determine the direction. No matter what direction the wind is blowing, you can sail in the direction that you so wish. The wind carries one ship east and another ship west. It's always according to the way you choose to set your sails. The sea is your life. You are the captain. The sails are your thoughts. Your thoughts, be they positive or negative, really do change the direction of your life. You're the captain of your own destiny. And even again, when you feel you might have been dealt a curveball in life, there's value in simply accepting the fact that life is sometimes not entirely fair, at least from a human perspective anyway. And when you accept that, you can be more at peace with yourself. Instead of obsessing over how unfair you believe your fate to be, focus on what you can control and change it for the better. Use your thoughts as sails to pass through life's challenging storms and navigate the tides of circumstances to happier ports. Now, of course, many people will argue if they had more of life's trappings, if they would only be so much more successful, they would be in a better place. They would be so much happier. What is it they say? Whoever says money can't buy happiness doesn't know where to shop. Sheer, utter gibberish and nonsense. Because contrary to popular belief, happiness doesn't come from fame, fortune, or other people or material possessions. The richest person in the world could be miserable, whilst a person living in a third world slum could be genuinely happy and content. There's a popular saying, the happiest people don't have the best of everything. They just make the best of everything that they have. You'll have a deeper sense of inner peace if you count your blessings instead of yearning for what one doesn't have. Or to put it in the famous words and timeless words of our sages, wealth is determined by being satisfied with your lot. You'll be happier if you focus and appreciate your reality. In fact, the more you yearn for what you don't have, the more discontented you will feel, the more frustrated you will be, the less happy you will be. And ironically, it's precisely that which gets in the way of you achieving real success. Because you see, again, contrary to popular misconception, success is not what brings happiness. Actually, happiness can genuinely bring success. What do I mean? The Talmud actually tells us that certain rabbis, prior to delivering a lecture, would always open up with some kind of anecdote, humor. And why? As is explained, simply because when those sitting there would be listening, it would relax the heart. It would open the mind. And then that, as a result, would broaden their horizons. When you are in a happier frame of mind, you function better. You absorb better. You think better. When the rabbis tell us joy permeates all obstacles, what they mean is that for all the things that you believe you can't do, for all the obstacles that we might sometimes create in our own minds, happiness enables you to transcend that, to rise above it. Happiness brings success because when you are in that better place, you can go on to achieve greater things. And so the bottom line really is this. By and large, happiness is a choice. There are two types of people, those who choose to be happy and those who might choose to be unhappy. Real happy people are happy because they choose to be happy. They make themselves happy. They maintain a positive outlook of life and remain at peace with themselves. And even when confronting problems that are real, challenges that are stressful, circumstances that might be overwhelming, sometimes it's simply about asking yourself, will this problem really matter in a year from now? Life's too short to get worked up over trivial situations. Letting things roll off your back, if you will help you put yourself at ease and be more at joy to be able to appreciate the more important things in life. You know, there was a rabbi who met up with his colleague, a friend, a priest, and he saw him looking rather portly. He hadn't seen him in a while. And he said to him, "Oh, I see you've been eating well." And he says, "Rabbi, I figured out how to eat for free." The rabbi says, "Really?" He says, "Yeah, follow me." He takes him into Scott's in London. The rabbi sits on the side. The priest says, "Watch this." He orders a 4-course meal. Afterwards, the waiter brings the bill. The priest turns around and says, "Excuse me, with all due respect, I've already paid the bill." The waiter looks at him and says, no, there must be some mistake. You didn't pay the bill. At which point he bellows and says, I'm a man of God. Are you accusing me of lying? And the waiter says, I'm sorry. And the manager comes out. We're really sorry. I don't know why there's a confusion. Yes, you paid the bill, and off the priest goes. Ate a free meal. And the rabbi thought, okay, I can do this too. He goes into Kai Feng, a wonderful kosher Chinese restaurant in London, sits down, orders a 4-course meal, is presented with the bill. He says, excuse me, I've already paid the bill. And the waiter says, no, you clearly haven't. I just brought it to you. And he says, I'm a man of God. I'm a religious man. Are you suggesting that I'm lying? And all of a sudden the waiter and the manager will come out. I'm so sorry. You must be right. You paid the bill. They come back half an hour later. The rabbi's still sitting there. He says, is there a problem? He says, yeah, I'm waiting for my change. There's no such a thing as a free lunch in life. Life is determined in whichever sort of way that it's going to come out to us. But the bottom line remains that when things happen, whichever way, and maybe one door of happiness closes, another one is always going to open. Our problem is we so often stare with frustration at the closed door that we ignore the new door that has opened. Another one of my favorite stories, Rabbi Zalman Aaron, a 19th century rabbi, was a very pious man, but equally a very successful businessman. And in one particular instance, he invested a lot of money and the deal went very bad. As a result of which, he was sitting one day in the Beis HaMedrash in the study hall, and his colleagues came in to ask him, is everything okay? And they see him sitting there looking so contented and so relaxed, and they couldn't understand it. They said, how could you sit here so relaxed after something like this happened to you? And he looked at them and he said, and what would you do if you were in my situation? And one chimed in and said, I'd be all broken down. I'd be so nervous. I'd be so anxious. Another piped up and said, I'd be crying my eyes out. And Rabbi Zalman Aaron said to him, let me ask you a question. In 10 years from now, would you still be having some kind of breakdown? Would you still be crying your eyes out? And they said, no, certainly not. Then it'll be a bitter memory, but we'll have moved on. And the rabbi said, exactly. I'm just like you, only a little faster. I've simply already fast forwarded 10 years. We have issues, we have concerns of sorts, against which we also, all of us, have goodness and things to be grateful for. Stuff happens. Life doesn't always go to plan, but to worry, to always be overwhelmed has never helped anyone, and it isn't going to do anything for us other than dig a deeper hole. So the tactic of looking to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, diversion of mind, may not be easy at first. And some people maybe like to wallow in self-pity, not realizing that they're only harming themselves and causing harm to others as well. So you owe it to yourself and to those affected by you. What can I do to extricate myself from this predicament, from this rut? The past is the past, and now it's time to fast forward, because the future is completely in our own hands. It's what we make of it. I know it's high ground, but every single one of us can get there. And I'll conclude with this. There was a chassid from the city of Kharkov, which you've all now become familiar with for unfortunate reasons with everything going on in the Ukraine. And he traveled a great distance to visit his teacher, the Rebbe Rashab. And the Rebbe greeted him and said to him, "Vos herzich in Kharkov?" What is doing in Kharkov? How things in Kharkov? To which he replied, "Things are wonderful in Kharkov. The Jewish community is thriving. Everybody gets along. The schools are full. People are happy and generous. The shuls are busy. Things are great." And the Rebbe was so overjoyed, and he gave him a gold coin and thanked him for the good news. Later that same day, another chassid came in, and he asked him the same question, "Vos herzich in Kharkov?" To which he replied, "Oh, Kharkov, things are absolutely terrible. The shuls are so boring. People are fighting with each other. People are maligning one another. People are just being malicious to one another. There's no decent education. It's all a real mess." And the Rebbe Rashab looked at him and said, "Thank you very much," and off he left. As it so happens, the two men made up that evening, the two Hasidim that had gone. The first one is telling the other, "Do you know, I went today and he asked me what I was doing in Kharkov and he gave me a gold ruble." And the other one's like, "What?" He immediately left, goes back to the Rebbe, and he says to him, "I don't understand. I told you the truth of what's going on in Kharkov. He sold you a bill of goods, fake news. And he gets the gold coin and I don't." To which the Rebbe Rashab replied, "You think I don't know what's going on in Kharkov? I know very well what's going on in Kharkov. I just wanted to know, which Kharkov do you live in?" There are two Charkovs in all of our lives, a choice point we encounter on a regular basis. It doesn't matter where you've been up to before, you are again in control of your own destiny. Your frame of mind, your attitude, your disposition are within your own power. Only you can decide your moods, your sense of self-worth. You can see the challenges of life as an obstacle or an opportunity. There are two ways to see ourselves, as either a victim of circumstances, which in turn is only going to make us more despondent, or someone determined to recreate yourself. And that sense of empowerment will make you happy. Everyone has two stories. The good news is you get to be the author. You choose which one to write. You need to sometimes pause and check yourself and ask yourself that important question at whichever juncture in life. Which Charkov do you live in? And so, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all only enduring happiness in all of your lives. Always remember, smiling is the way that your soul says hello. For every minute that you are dissatisfied, disgruntled, and displeased, you're losing 60 seconds of happiness. And even when the good things come to a close, don't cry because it's over. Smile and be happy because it happened. We were born to be happy, not to be perfect. And above all else, remember that to find true happiness, you need to only open your heart to love. Love where you are, love what you do, love other people, and perhaps above all else, love yourself too. Thank you very much.
After this inspiring lecture, you don't have to consult a psychiatrist. The only addition in terms of being happy, Emunah Hashem. Emunah Hashem. Because Hashem is our anchor. And whom do you call upon when you're in distress? Hashem. So you cannot forget the healing power is not only us. And bottom line, Rabbi, you have to be positive. That's the message. With God's help. Cannot leave God out of this. Anyhow, I'm sure you have many questions. And Rabbi Schochet is ready to answer any